We're here, we're queer, and we love the Lord. That's right, you're listening to Coming Out Christian, a podcast about life at the intersection of queer identity and Christian faith. This fun, faithful, and sometimes irreverent podcast is a production of Love Boldly, an Ohio-based nonprofit creating spaces where LGBTQIA+ people can flourish in Christianity. I'm one of your hosts, Siobhan Boyd Nelson, and my co-host is the Reverend Dr. Ben Hillscamp, Executive Director of Love Boldly. So join us, and let's find out who's coming out today. Well, hello there, Ben. How's it going?
Doing well, Siobhan. How are you?
Oh, I cannot complain too much. I've got some travel that I'm planning right now, and that will be imminent when this episode airs. And that is travel for homecoming. Do you attend your college homecoming events?
So, I attended that weird kind of homecoming event that's like the 180 days homecoming, like right after you graduate from college.
Okay.
This may not be a thing that goes on at other colleges, but it goes on at mine. And I know we're going to introduce our guest in a few minutes, and we'll get to where he went to college, but we both attended the same college. And I realize our listeners can't see it, but I wore the Swanee shirt just for today. So maybe this is just a Swanee thing that we do like a 180-day graduation. I don't know. But I went to that one, but I hate to say it, I have not been back to my college since then. And
Wow.
this is actually, I really should be going this year because this is my 15th reunion,
Ooh.
which is just really hard to think about. But
These numbers are hard. They're getting hard, right, Ben?
yeah.
Yeah. So I also went to that homecoming, the one that's right after you graduate. Never heard it referred to in that way, but it was a very important homecoming to go to, at least for me personally. So much so that I broke up with my long-term boyfriend over it. So yeah, I know, right? That's kind of a big thing. But he couldn't go because he couldn't get off of work. And I said, well, I'm going anyway, because it's Howard Homecoming. Y'all have heard about it in the rap lyrics. It is that amazing. I have seen Jay-Z perform on the Yard in person for free. Again, I'm an old, and I wasn't going to miss it. And then I think I went to one more, either a homecoming or graduation, as friends are graduating, and took Mars back to the Yard when he was a little one. But now this year, when I go to homecoming, my son will actually still be a student. He should have graduated in May. It's almost there. We're almost done. And so my really fun thing to do this year is to demand that my son come meet me on the Yard so that we can spend homecoming together. It's every son's greatest nightmare. Which is pretty typical for me.
And I think you were telling me this homecoming is special because it's also your line anniversary or reunion. I'm probably using the wrong word. I'm sorry. I'm a member of a historically white fraternity. So,
Yes.
but please take it away from there.
I am a member of the Divine Nine, Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, Alpha Chapter, right there at Howard University, and we are Spring 2000. So this is the 25th anniversary. It was a really big D9 year on the Yard for Howard, and so I actually think it's going to be a big homecoming year with all of those different lines coming together. So it's a bunch of 45-year-olds are really about to wreck shop in DC. So if you're in the DC area in late October, you've been warned.
Okay.
All
Heard.
right. Okay, warnings out of the way. Let's get to our guest. I'm very excited. I have already learned a new term because our guest was joining us today. So I'm excited to learn some more. Today, we are joined by the Right Reverend Canon Ryan Currie. As canon for the Common Mission, Ryan is responsible for stewarding the relationships and gatherings of the diocese, including diocesan convention, clergy conference, and various cohort groups and committees. Ryan is a two-time graduate of Sewanee, the University of the South. He has both a BA and a master's in divinity. Ryan served before becoming a priest as an administrative assistant in Sewanee's president and vice chancellor's office and in other support roles at the university. Ryan was ordained in the Diocese of the Central Gulf Coast, and Ryan previously served as the Associate Rector of Holy Cross Faith Memorial Episcopal Church in Pawleys Island. In 2022, he married Low Country native Richard Culbertson. In his spare time, Ryan enjoys singing and playing piano, cooking and entertaining, and traveling, and I hope that includes cooking amazing Low Country food. Welcome,
Absolutely.
Ryan. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you guys. I'm really pleased to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation, and I just want to appreciate your getting that terminology right. And let me just say too, there was one part that's a little different. So I
Okay.
am the Reverend Canon, not the Right Reverend Canon.
Oh,
And
that's
the
right.
difference
Yes,
is,
yes.
yeah, the difference is Right Reverend is the honorific that we use for a bishop,
Right, yes.
and that's a promotion that I do not want.
I hear you, and my apologies.
All
I
good.
was reading about all the different folks at your diocese, and so that right reverend got stuck in my brain. Apologies there. But want to get to our first question that we ask all of our guests. What is your testimony? What is your story at the intersection of queer identity and faith, the church, however you see that?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. When I was thinking about this question, I was thinking that I could either start at the beginning or sort of where I am now. But I think I will start at the beginning today. So I was born in Mobile, Alabama, down on the Gulf Coast. It's a small, middle class, ordinary kind of suburban family, I would say. It was my two parents, my mom, my dad, and my little brother and me. And I would say that both of my parents came from very devout religious households growing up. My dad on the Roman Catholic side, his mother was like French Canadian Roman Catholic. I mean, 6 a.m. mass like every day.
Yeah.
Serious stuff. I have these memories of sitting on her staircase as a probably like 5 or 6 year old, and my job was to help untangle the rosaries. So that's what I was doing as a little boy with that grandmother. My mother's family were what I like to tell people they were Jimmy Carter style Southern Baptists.
Hmm.
They're few and far between nowadays, but that's sort of who they were, and their way of being in the world was so informed by a more kind of social justice minded approach to faith, I would say.
Hmm.
Um, but in any case, my parents had both grown up in these devout households. I should have said my mother's father was a pastor.
Hmm.
So they grew up in the church. And I think by the time they were starting their own family, they were both kind of tired of it. I think they were sort of burnt out with church. It wasn't something that they were against. There was no sort of, opposition to like raising me and my brother within the church. It just really wasn't a thing. Um, that proved to be sort of controversial with my grandparents. There's a funny story of me riding with my mother in the back seat of her parents' car. We were going to the beach, I think, and I would have been about 3 or 4 years old, and I was a thumb sucker, so I had my thumb in my mouth, and I just popped my little thumb out and said, "Mama, why can't little children go to church and learn about Jesus?"
Oh,
She said that was really the only time
oh.
in my life that she really felt she would have been justified in just like opening that door, pushing my car seat out, like you're done, that's it. Um, so anyway, I guess if you think the spirit is at work in those sorts of ways, it was happening for me early on. So I get a little older and still not really going to church or involved with that. I mean, occasionally vacation Bible school type stuff. But I take music pretty seriously. So I was learning piano.
Mhm.
And um, I was I was getting more and more serious, I would say. And my piano teacher at one point said, if you would take a few organ lessons, I would hire you as like a substitute at the church where I serve as an organist. And I know there are others who need occasional substitute organists. So, I was 15, 16 years old. And so to make a little money, I decided I would try to do that. So we had family friends, one of whom was like an organist choir master at a Presbyterian church in my hometown. And so I started organ lessons with him. And the first lesson, he said, so look, the deal is with this is that if you're going to learn the organ, you really have to understand how a choir works, a church choir.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, how so? He said, well, you just have to learn by doing. So I need you to join the church choir.
Oh.
So my sort of first my first missionary victory, if you could call it that, was having my mother drive me to church on Sundays and for choir rehearsal. So I brought my mother back into the Presbyterian church for at least a few years in high school because I needed someone to drive me to choir practice. So I guess I won her back. So then, I do that through high school. And I would say at high school, that's for me, I think when I began to become aware that I was different from a lot of other boys.
Mm-hmm.
I liked other boys, or at least was, even if I couldn't appreciate necessarily what I liked about them, I was starting to realize that I was more interested in them in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So, finished school, high school, and I wanted to go to a small college, and so I wound up at Sewanee, where I got to meet Ben.
Uh-huh.
When I was a freshman, Ben, I think were you the proctor of my dorm or something like that?
I don't
Which is
think I
kind of
was
like the RA.
I was a proctor, but I don't think your building.
Yeah. Well, in any case, Ben and I got to know each other a little bit in the choir because we were both, when I got to college, I was like, sure, I'll keep doing the choir.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first exposure really to the Episcopal Church, I would say, because the college choir there sings in chapel, which is a regular old Episcopal service every Sunday during the term. So came into the church through music. Being immersed in that community in college, I started to feel more and more this kind of sense of vocation, and was learning more about myself. So kind of the big moment at the core of my testimony, I would say, my junior year, after a great family Christmas, back with my grandparents, the whole family was there. I got a call about a month into the spring semester, so say early February, and it was my parents, and they told me that they were getting divorced.
Oh,
This
no.
came as a complete shock to me. I didn't anticipate
Yeah.
it. And then I came to find out, this is sort of a long story. I came to find out from another relative, which really it shouldn't have happened this way, but it did, that the reason for my parents splitting up was that my mother was gay, and that she was ready to move, to come out herself. The bad part about that is that it should have been her that
Mm-hmm.
was able to have this conversation with me.
Mm-hmm.
So that that I would say set off a kind of personal crisis. Like,
Oh,
what
yeah.
does this mean for me? As a person who was sort of still in the closet myself at that point, but really sort of more and more aware of my own sexuality. What does it mean for my family? What was it like for my mother to experience living this version of herself that, had a sort of loving family and everything, but still she couldn't be her fullest, truest version of herself. So I was sort of going through it. for about a week or so, I was really in this acute, kind of very chaotic space of like, what the hell is happening?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I was sitting in the dining hall at college, and I was in a fraternity. We sat at long tables, so it was lunch, and I was sitting with my couple of fraternity brothers right across from me. And it just all kind of came to a head, and I began to cry. And the way I think of it is like I was like tearfully erupting into this plate of spaghetti that I was eating. So it was just one of those moments where I'd sort of hit my limit and it starts to come
Mm-hmm.
out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one of my dearest best friends, fraternity brother, he intervened, right? So he grabs me, he sort of took me by the hand and led me out the fire escape door of the dining hall. So it set off the alarm, but he was
Oh
just getting
my.
me out of there. And across from the dining hall was a little sort of ravine. It's a kind of famous trail area that people go to just to take a walk in town and be in some green space. There's some water. And at one portion of that trail, there's this cross, a big Celtic cross sculpture. And there's a bench there. And so my friend took me to that spot, not with any sort of religious intention or anything at all. It's just sort of a convenient stopping point to kind of talk.
Mm-hmm.
And so we talked about what was going on. And, I was still crying. I was still sort of letting this all out. And he's embracing me. He's giving me this great big sort of brotherly hug. And over his shoulder, through tears in my eyes, I see the cross. And for me, it was this moment of sort of this sudden epiphany that love and suffering go hand in hand. And it's part of how God works in the world, is through love mixed in with suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So, that I would say was really my kind of, road to Damascus sort of moment, insofar as I've had one.
Yeah.
I came out, I began pursuing a call toward ordination and went to seminary. While I was in seminary, I met my now husband. We were roommates, or housemates, I should say.
Okay.
And it was kind of funny because we were literally sort of sneaking in and out of each other's windows at this house, because at least at that point, the kind of policy was seminarians were not supposed to date each other and live together without permission.
Mm-hmm.
The policy was not designed for people who fall in love while they're already housemates. So anyway,
yeah.
we were sneaking around for a little bit, and then we told the administration, the dean of the seminary, that okay, we've got this thing going on. And he just gave us this big hug and a kiss. He's like, "I love you both. This is fabulous. I'm so happy for you." And that was that.
Oh, wow.
It was so sweet. So my husband Richard is a Latin scholar, and that's what he was doing while we were there in seminary, Latin and Greek and stuff like that. So we go to the Twin Cities for a little bit while he's doing more grad school. But he's from South Carolina, where we live now.
Mm-hmm.
And so wound up feeling a real sense of call, sort of personally and professionally, to South Carolina, because, and this really gets to what I do, what my ministry looks like day in and day out nowadays. This diocese within the Episcopal Church, the Diocese of South Carolina, had a long, hard-fought, protracted, acrimonious schism or division within the church, this big church fight over the issues of human sexuality. Okay. Could gay people be ordained? Were gay people just by default they were sinners? These sorts of fights have played out in so many different church bodies. We all know, and so eventually it went to the courts, right? I mean, the Supreme Court of South Carolina, after literally 10 years of legal fighting back and forth about who had rights to church properties, all within this fight about human sexuality. After a 10-year slog in the courts of that, we now find ourselves in a position where a number of those churches have returned, and we're sort of in a moment of repair from that schism over sexuality,
Okay.
reconciliation.
Mm-hmm.
And so my work is the Canon for Common Mission. Canon just means I serve on the bishop's staff. That's all that means. In many ways is about finding places of alignment, developing a culture that's more cohesive within the diocese and more based in our common values. It's been a fabulous season of ministry working here because I am surrounded by people in all the churches in our diocese, the 30-something churches in this region. I'm surrounded by these people who made a commitment to be in the Episcopal Church, which in that period was a commitment to say, we believe in the dignity of every human being, regardless of who they love or their gender identity.
Right.
That, God's love is for everyone. So I'm surrounded by people who made a commitment to that version of faith. There's really no better, no finer group of Christians, I think, to just sort of be doing this work among. So that's really sort of my story.
That's an amazing story. I think that you kind of the curveball. I mean, it was a curveball when it hit you. It was a curveball when you were telling the story that your mom was gay. And can you talk
Yeah,
about how did that impact you? Not the divorce necessarily. I know divorce is a really tough thing, particularly for young people in their teens. But
sure.
was there a way for you to um, think about your mom and her sexual orientation outside of that divorce? And was that work to be able to get to that point?
There was definitely work involved.
Yeah.
I had very complicated feelings about the situation because, my dad's in the picture, right? And they
Yeah.
had a relationship that looked, really healthy to me from my vantage point, healthy and happy overall. Um, so, I won't deny that I had some feelings of like resentment and anger about this. But I would say over time, um, what I came to understand is that my mother was raised in a different generation. And yes,
Hmm.
even though her parents, were faithful and within the Baptist landscape, fairly progressive, um, it's just not something that really seemed like an option to her to come out earlier in life. And she knew
Yeah.
she wanted kids too. So as I began to sort of appreciate the kind of complexity within my mother's story, um, it really helped me just come to terms with that and begin to relate to her in a new way. So now like the story I'm thinking of is how a couple of years ago, so Mobile, my hometown, is the birthplace of Mardi Gras. There's a
Yes.
huge queer Mardi Gras association in Mobile and a big Mardi Gras ball that they throw every year, the Order of Osiris.
Okay.
So my mother bought a table, a table worth of tickets for all of the sort of queer friends, including me and my husband and some other friends that we brought to town. And so there's my mother, like looking spiffy as hell in her tails. Like she didn't wear a dress like an evening gown, but she wore white tie, tails, and everything,
Ooh.
and she looked fabulous. And there we are at this big party with a bunch of drag queens. We're celebrating and just enjoying ourselves. So to me, that's kind of an icon of like how that set of relationships in family life has sort of changed.
Yeah, and that's beautiful to hear that you have gotten to that point where now it sounds like the relationship is strong, you have an understanding. You were able to understand what the choices were that were facing her. Um,
Exactly.
and I think based upon what been said about our ages, we've been talking about ages all day. It's really just a generation later, right? And but to me, as a 45-year-old woman who absolutely wanted kids, I mean,
Yeah.
I found a book or a speech I had written in eighth grade to accept an award. And, the first thing I listed as a goal was to have a family. And this is in eighth grade. Like I
Hmm.
really wanted kids. And in the 80s, let alone the 70s or the 60s, having kids and being gay just did not go in the same
Right.
conversation, right? And there was only one path. And so, yeah, my heart does go out to her a bit for being in that position of wanting two things and not really having that both and society yet that would have allowed those two
Yeah.
things to happen.
Well, and what you say was your goal that you set out for yourself in eighth grade, I find really admirable. And I'll just share briefly that what I wrote for the like career day survey that we took in seventh or eighth grade about like, you know, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I put retired. I'm still not retired. I'm still working. I got a ways to go. I'm 35,
Yeah.
but anyway, so being a mom is, I think, more admirable.
It's a choice. I know that it is definitely a choice. Someone was just saying the other day, I love my kids, don't love parenting. And that's real.
Oh, wow. I never heard it
It
put that way, but that makes a lot of sense.
isn't that very
Yeah.
real. Now, I'm the person who loves the kids, also loves the parenting part of it, but I can absolutely respect that other side and that need to just be your own person.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, talk to me about being from the South. So, I am
Mm.
someone, I was born and raised in Columbus, but I like to say I am Creole by marriage because my wife was raised in Shreveport, Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
So, all this talk of Mardi Gras got me really excited.
Mm-hmm.
And then your husband is from South Carolina. And I just know it's a different world um, from having visited the stories of my wife's childhood. What is it like right now being in the South as
Mm.
an out gay clergy person? Because I see the out gay clergy here in the Midwest in Columbus. We're a pretty gay city.
Mm-hmm.
And so rainbow stoles have become kind of a thing that you will
Yeah,
see
right,
around
right.
here. Tell us about what it's like in the South, because I mean, in many ways, the culture is different.
It is. It's funny. I was actually talking to my own therapist recently about sort of my identification with the South, like what it means for me to be a Southerner, and she was like, "Well, what does the South mean to you?"
Mm,
Um, and the first word that came to my mind actually was queer.
really?
I think there's a lot of queerness about the South.
Okay.
And at least my experience of it. So, growing up in Mobile, this coastal city, it was a French colony back in the day. There's just a
Mm-hmm.
little bit more spice in the culture, a little bit more variety. A kind of tolerance, I think, for people of different kinds.
Mm-hmm.
So there's actually like a gayborhood in Mobile and multiple gay bars that have been around for a long time. So um, that's not everywhere in the South, but that was true of
Right.
my hometown. Another funny story related to this is that when I did come out to my dad, we were having Christmas dinner together, and it was just the two of us at the beach. It was like one of those, it was pretty sad, actually, this kind of
Aw.
post-divorce Christmas dinner where it was just the two of us. But I was like, so I made a big pot of gumbo, both of our favorite foods. That's what we did for Christmas dinner, and we're sitting across, and I was like, okay, now's the moment. So I came out by telling him, about Richard, about this new person in my life, and I said, Dad, I've found someone. We're really getting closer and closer, and I think this might be, pretty important relationship. And he said, "Oh, really? What's her name?" And I was like, "Well, his name is Richard." And it was a pause, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he did the best he could, this quiet, sort of very boomer kind of guy, nice as can be. And, this is new, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Outside of his frame of experience in many ways. Uh, so he said, "Well, where is Richard from?" And I said, "Georgetown, South Carolina." And he said, "Well, where's Georgetown?" I said, "It's about 60 miles north of Charleston on the coast." And so I'm expecting more questions about who Richard is, but then my dad
Mm-hmm.
just says, "Well, so Georgetown, do they have a deep water port there?" So, yes, they do have a deep water port, but this is my dad's frame of reference, right?
Yes.
So, anyway, we get a big kick out of both coming from places with deep water ports in the South.
I
Um,
love that your dad tried to find commonality,
yeah,
like something to just grasp onto and be
yeah,
positive about in that moment.
that's exactly what was going on. Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, and so the way things are now, I would say in the South, in Charleston where we live now, we have a great community. There's a couple of great organizations, queer organizations, that are active. We have Pride every year, and
Hmm.
it is so moving to me, I will say, participating in that as a clergy person. We bring a group of Episcopalians that participate in Pride, and the responses that you see from people who just do not expect people of faith to be involved, and not just involved, but like, y'all should see us. I mean, we got like 30 something flags going. We've got matching t-shirt. Like, we're one of the most, I would say, kind of visible presences at Pride, like a distinctive visible presence.
Love that.
Um, and people are so kind of moved by that. They
Oh,
want
yeah.
to come up and get a picture with you if you're, in your clergy gear or whatever. Um, so I think, in many ways, being in the South, sometimes I'm like, boy, I wish I was back in the Twin Cities, to have
Hmm.
just a little bit more of that openness to people who are different. Because the South is still culturally very conservative in many ways. Um, but I also have a strong sense, like I was saying, a strong sense of call to this place at this time. I'm really hoping to make this place better for queer people of faith or of no faith in the future. I mean, that's really part of my sense of call here.
Ryan, it's interesting that when you started answering this question, you said that when you think of the South, you think of the word queer. And it reminded me of a professor that I'm imagining we both had at some point at Swanee, who once said to me, when you think about the South, you have to remember that Charleston was queer long before San Francisco really existed.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And there is some truth to that statement,
Hmm.
that um, you do and do not see necessarily in the quote unquote North. Um, I'm not sure how North Ohio is, but still.
We
Well,
border
I
Canada.
think, yeah, I think, I think especially in these coastal cities, like these were very, I mean, even more than they are now, I think at other points in history, extremely cosmopolitan sorts of places.
Oh, yeah.
Um, you know, New Orleans, for example, like this is a good example, I think, is like New Orleans had like the oldest opera company in the country, and it was all French speaking. It's
Hmm.
just a different vibe in some of these places. Or you think of Savannah, right? And if you've seen the movie or read the book, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, and the drag scene there. There's just always been. This is another funny Southern kind of illustration of this. There's just always been this undercurrent of queerness in the South that surfaces. The place where I saw this really acutely actually was when I was on a gay friends vacation to Dollywood, which is Dolly Parton's big theme park
Right.
in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. And it was so funny because you go and like all so many of the roller coasters and the rides and stuff are like scripture themed, okay, right? So
Yeah.
there's the big
Yeah.
roller coaster where you're rising up on eagle's wings. Um, and so there's a lot of people who I think are there for the the biblically aligned theme park thing, and yet you walk around and you're like, oh, I see you. You start to do the little moves like I recognize you, like you and your hubby or whatever over there, like the gay boys or the trans couple or something like that. Everyone loves Dolly Parton, right?
That's
I
what I was
mean,
going to say. Dolly's an icon. The gays love
iconic.
Dolly. And of course, they're going to go to Dollywood. Yes.
Exactly, iconic. But that to me is like where you see this South where even when you're in one of the most conservative areas of the South, really, culturally
Hmm.
conservative, you see this kind of undercurrent, this queerness, it shows up.
It does. And it really speaks to just how present queer folks are everywhere, right? And
everywhere.
if queer folks are just boiling up to the surface in even these bastions of conservative culture, then it's gonna boil up in other places. And I like how you spoke about the coast and how the
Mm,
coast really is, um, it is cosmopolitan. It is cities on the coast, communities on the coast tend to be more inclusive. They tend to be more liberal because that is where people mix. That is where different cultures mix. And so,
yes,
yeah, what you're saying makes total sense because, you know, I've got a different sexual orientation. This person speaks a different language. This person eats a different part of the pig. Right? This person uses different
right.
spices. I've got difference with everyone, let alone, who we're sleeping with.
Exactly.
It kind of puts it
Exactly.
into perspective there. So neat. So how did you end up, and you might have said this, so apologies, because I've been riveted the entire time talking to you, in the Episcopal Church. And I asked this might be kind of
Yeah.
a curiosity that's coming to me because I have found people get to the Episcopal Church, or I have found in the doing of this podcast that people get to the Episcopal Church in a number of different ways. It's not being raised in the Episcopal Church that gets you to the Episcopal Church. So I'm wondering um,
Hmm.
what got you there? What attracted you to the Episcopal Church?
Yeah, I like that question a lot because it actually allows me to give a little testimony about some of my siblings in the Episcopal Church who really, I think many queer people have found their way into the Episcopal Church because it has taken affirming stances on so many issues of human sexuality.
Mm-hmm.
So they know that they're not going to fit in their evangelical non-denominational church anymore, or their Roman Catholic parish. They're like sensing that, like, okay, something else, I need something where I'm going to feel more affirmed. And a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people have that kind of story. A lot of people are also attracted to, the more liturgical style of worship that we have. So a great musical tradition, a sort of high view of the kind of ritual of worship.
Mm-hmm.
I think that really speaks to some people across the sexuality spectrum, but in special ways, I think, to some queer people. For me, um, I would say both of those are kind of they're in there, but my primary story, and this really is not the most interesting thing, but it was because I went to an Episcopal school and I didn't
Okay.
seek out an Episcopal college. It just happened that Sewanee was an Episcopal institution. And then being in the choir, that was really my first time being immersed, I would say, in Christian community, in a worshiping Christian community. And it was an Episcopal one. So it just became, it's sort of where I learned the ropes.
Mm-hmm.
It was really, I mean, yes, I had that season within a Presbyterian church in high school, but it wasn't the same. It's not where I sort of took root. So my first kind of roots in faith, I would say, were within the Episcopal church. And the great thing is that it wasn't a problem when I came out of the closet or
Yeah.
got married to my husband. In
Yeah.
fact, I will share this. This is something I'm very proud of. Ben, you might not know this, but Richard and I, we went back and learned this after the fact. We were the first gay men to be married in our college chapel.
Wow.
So that we're really proud of that being a little first for us. There was a lesbian couple that got married the year before, so I can't claim that we were the first queer couple to get married, but at least for gay men, so it's something we're proud of.
And that's
That's super cool.
definitely a bit of progress as well for our college because in 2013, 2014, there was a couple that I know we both know who wanted to be married in that chapel and were essentially turned down
Hmm.
by the governing bodies at the time um, because they were queer and because I think at that point, Tennessee still had not, this is before Oberfeld, so Tennessee had still not legalized gay marriage,
Right.
or marriage equality rather. So I mean that even was a bit of progress for Swanee.
Yeah, it really was. And it's funny, that sort of links back to South Carolina in some ways too, because my first exposure to the whole situation in South Carolina, this church schism within the Episcopal Church, was when I was working for the university president's office. We call him the vice chancellor. But um, I was working in that office, and the trustees of the university are drawn from all these different dioceses within the Episcopal Church in the Southeast. And we had this big question of like, okay, there's now two delegations that want to show up from South Carolina. One, the
Mm,
Episcopal side, and one that was the, breakaway side. But they were claiming, that they had the sort of rights to all the things that go with being an Episcopalian. They sort of saw themselves as being the rightful owners of that. So we had to decide, like, okay, how does that work? Back in 2013 and 2014, right in that same period. So
wow.
yeah, the university has come a long way. Yeah.
That's really great. And I have to believe that it has at least partly to do with people like you and Ben being there, being present in those spaces. I always just like to highlight the fact that there are people who are associated with these faith spaces, with churches, with institutions during these times when they're not making the best decision or the decision we'd like them to make, who continue to push from the inside or who continue to kind of journey
Yes.
with the institution and then coming back and being able to celebrate with the institution, so many years later when they finally have made the right decision.
Well, Ben, I think, Ben, this was you that's made this comment years ago. And it may have been in person, it may have been on social media, but for some reason, I think that you said this, that in respect to our college, to Sewanee, you said there are very few gay students, but many gay alumni, right? So
Mm,
it was the kind of place where I think in a fairly traditional kind of Southern inflected culture at that college, very, very blue blazer and bow ties kind of scene. Um, Many students, I think, were not out, but many alumni did come out. But I think
right,
the fact that Ben was naming that actually then began to, I mean, that challenges the institution and the culture, right?
right.
To expand, to open up to, this more authentic experience.
And I would say, um, yeah, I remember saying that. It was not original by any means. It was something that I had been told as well. But I think, there's definitely an element at Swanee of standing on the shoulders of others. Maybe
Hmm.
not of giants, but of others. Um, you
Very
know,
much so.
when you think about the Swanee is probably there are a few other Episcopal affiliated universities and colleges still in the U.S., but Swanee is probably the most prominent among them. Columbia used to be Episcopal affiliated. Kenyon used to be.
Kenyon. Hmm.
Bard College in New York. I mean, some of these bigger name colleges used to be affiliated, but are no longer. Swanee has remained. So where goes the Episcopal Church goes Swanee, and vice versa. I
Hmm.
mean, it's I don't think it's a small thing to mention that Gene Robinson, the
Yeah.
first out Episcopal bishop, the first male out bishop, I think, anywhere in Christianity, at
Hmm.
least in the modern era, um, graduated from Swanee. Actually,
Hmm.
graduated from
Wow.
Swanee in I think 1969, right before the Stonewall riots.
Hmm.
Um, so as Swanee was dealing with, hey, we're owned by all these dioceses of the Episcopal Church, some of which now have a continuing diocese and a breakaway diocese. We were also wrestling with the fact that this person who was the embodiment of this crisis in the Episcopal Church and frankly Christianity in general, Gene Robinson, is one of our alumni.
Hmm.
Mm,
Um, it is a tradition at Swanee that when someone becomes an Episcopal bishop, they're almost automatically given an honorary doctorate. It's
okay.
it's it's not exactly automatic, but it's pretty much automatic. Gene was not given an honorary doctorate until 20 years after he became. I mean, he was already retired as a
Yeah, it was a
bishop
long time.
before he
Wow.
became. Um, I was working for Love Boldly. Let's put it that way, because I
Wow.
wrote
Okay.
about this for our Monday Moment series. I mean, it's been just a few years ago that he was finally awarded that honorary doctorate from Swanee, even though he had been a bishop already, he had already retired as a bishop. But it was just that he was such it wasn't that Gene himself is a lightning rod. It's the fact that he was the embodiment of that crisis. And again, a
Hmm.
crisis that wasn't just in the Episcopal Church, it was really in most of mainstream Christianity.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah, and
That's a
my favorite moment from when he went to get that honorary degree when he came back to Swanee, there were all these pictures they did. Like one of the things that he insisted on doing while he was there was going back and visiting his own fraternity house. And like there are these great pictures of him with all the college guys, out on the lawn of the fraternity or around the fire pit or whatever, just hanging out. I thought that also shows how much the kind of culture has moved that this gay retired Episcopal bishop who was in the closet for so long, from that college experience, but could then go back to this place that he loves. I mean, a place that he loves, although has complicated feelings about, and really sort of revisit this place and this culture.
Yeah, how beautiful that he could return with such love and grace. Even
Exactly.
though there was such an obvious dropping of the ball there, he still embraced that moment and harkened back to his love for the university and for the people. That's beautiful. Well, I have learned a tremendous amount, and I knew I would, not only about being Episcopal, but also about you, Ryan. Thank you so much for sharing your testimony with us. You have told us some amazing stories, and all of them so hopeful. And I guess I want to harken back
Mm.
to what you said about, suffering and also joy, love being there together. And I think that what you've shared to us really embodies that there is some pain, but there's also some joy, some love to go along with that suffering. So thank you so much for being our guest today and sharing with us.
Thank you. Y'all asked some great questions, and Siobhan, you're just a joy to talk to. And Ben, it's great to see you again. We'll have to reconnect sometime up on the mountain.
Yes, definitely, definitely.
So before you go, we're going to do our final two segments of the episode. The first one is the query of the day. Yes, that is a pun. I love them. It's like I'm not a dad, but my goodness, doesn't Bond love a dad joke?
Oh
So the
yeah.
query, the query of the day that I'm going to ask Ben and Ryan. This is a shout out to my wife. My poor wife just learned that they have a shellfish allergy, and
Oh
you
no.
Oh,
and
no.
oh yeah, the grief, the pain is real. Like I said, my wife is
And
from
she's from
Louisiana.
Louisiana.
From
Damn.
Louisiana, right?
That's
Right.
rough.
Ryan's right. So I need you to dig in there, Ryan. I want your favorite food. I want your favorite low country food. You said you make gumbo for Christmas. We used to make gumbo for Thanksgiving. I think that tradition has now gone because my wife can't really imagine it without the crab and shrimp.
Yeah.
Yeah, but other than gumbo, other than the forbidden gumbo, what is your, low country dish, southern dish that either you just want to eat it every day or you love preparing it?
Mm. Okay, well, gumbo would still be my ride or die, but I think, something that I really love about both my hometown and Charleston is
Hmm.
when the weather starts to get a little colder, it starts to get a little rainy, the days get shorter. That is the perfect season for oysters. And
Ah,
I love them raw, on the half shell, or I love an oyster roast. That's a big thing here in Charleston and in the Low Country. That's what people do to get together. Instead of like, I mean, I guess you could have a chili cook-off, of course, but here, it's oysters. So you
yeah.
get your keg of beer, you get your oysters, and a big group of people, and a lot of people bring their own little oyster knives and their gloves to
Hmm.
shuck them with and stuff. So I love that. That's a great way to eat and celebrate.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. What about you, Ben?
So one of the things I really miss about definitely with Swanee, but also just about the South in general, and I think this is technically low country, at least in origin, is just a good old shrimp boil.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Big table, spread out everything, folks just standing around, grabbing what they want, maybe just standing there, peeling their shrimp, eating, talking, carrying on, hopefully with like a good bluegrass or folk band there.
Oh
Someone used
yeah.
to do this during orientation every year. Um, I don't know. That to me is just so quintessentially Southern, and it's such a great like community building, bring people together in a very non-ostentatious way. And something I've not had in probably a decade, unfortunately. But totally a good shrimp boil.
Oh yeah, you're not getting one of those in Columbus very often, are you? Are you? Um,
Yeah.
so I'm going to say this is probably going to show my Appalachian roots, really, but my
Yeah.
favorite is red beans and rice. And I'm going to tell you,
Oh,
we
yes.
just got back from a cruise. We were on vacation and we had been in Europe. And we got home, and my wife's like, I just need like some good, like good food. And I was like, I'm going to make some red beans and rice because
So
we are
good.
home, we are Southern. For when I was in New Orleans one year, it was my hangover food the next morning. And so now I will eat red beans and rice for any meal. It has become a breakfast food for me. I love a bean. I'm from Appalachia. I do love a bean.
Yeah, it's fabulous. Here in the Low Country too, if you're interested in food, you should look up the history of like the rice culture here,
Oh,
which was
yeah.
really brought by, the people who were brought here as enslaved folks from West
Yep.
Africa. But the sort of story that a lot of people don't know is that this was not just labor. This was like expertise. I mean, these folks were engineers of a whole system of agriculture
Right.
that led to so many great cuisines and all these great rice dishes around here. So
Yeah.
also love that stuff in terms of low country food.
Oh, so cool. So cool. Okay, now I'm hungry. But before we close up, we gotta do our moment in queer Christian history. This is when we are reminded that not only have we always been here, we've always been here in the church. Ben, what you got for us today?
So I decided to pull from our Episcopal history, particularly knowing we had Ryan as our guest today. So I want to turn us back to 1977, which is the year that the Reverend Dr. Polly Murray was ordained an Episcopal priest. She was a Black queer womanist, feminist, gender nonconforming at parts of her life person. She was one of the first, if not the first, Black woman ordained in the Episcopal Church. Um, and just someone who not only for the Episcopal Church, but definitely within that denomination, but within Christianity and particularly American Christianity, set a lot of firsts as a clergy person, as someone who's ordained, as a scholar. She had both a legal scholar background as well as theology, wrote poetry, just et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But really someone um, who brought a lot of those different identities, that very intersectional um, a way of showing up in the church. And again, the church very broadly defined.
And an alum of Howard University.
Oh, I
Woohoo!
didn't realize that.
Nice.
Yeah, she was, I believe, the first woman in the law school. So was
Oh,
an absolute
awesome.
trailblazer. I love that individual. Thank you for sharing, Ben.
Totally. Thank you.
Also,
Our
like
oh
one
yeah.
of the just coolest people in the history of Christianity. Like just the photos of her, like in her collar with her cigarette. I mean, she just looks cool as hell.
Yes,
Yes, but
indeed. Yes, indeed.
yes. So this brings us to the end of another amazing episode. Thank you again to our wonderful guest, Ryan Currie. Ryan, is there anything that you would like to promote for the time after this episode's going to air?
Sure. So, if you happen to be in the neighborhood of South Carolina or not too far from Charleston, we have our diocesan convention, which sounds boring. I mean, yes, it is sort of our business meeting for our diocese, but it's also our family reunion. And so we're having some low country food. We're
Yeah.
also welcoming two guest speakers, the Reverend Dr. Luther Smith, who is an expert on the thought of Howard Thurman. He's a real specialist in the intersection of civil rights and human rights in theology. And the other person who's coming is the Reverend Dr. Carter Hayward, who was one of a group of 11, the first women ordained in the Episcopal Church in the 1970s. And she herself is a queer theologian. She's a lesbian and has been such an advocate within the Episcopal Church and within Christianity more broadly. So That's November 6th through 8th. If you can join us, please do. And just want to say thank you guys so much. This has been great.
Well, that sounds like a really fun time, actually. Some
Yeah.
good food, some good people. You just told us how wonderful the people that you work with are, and then some amazing speakers. So I hope you really enjoy that and that folks get a chance to get there and hear that amazing word. Well, Ben, this brings us to the end of another episode. Thank you for being you. Thank you, listeners, for listening. And please remember to like, subscribe, and please share. Give somebody else a little bit of joy, a little bit of light in their day. And we will see you next time on Coming Out Christian.
Thanks so much for joining us today. We hope this conversation encouraged you, challenged you, and maybe just helped you feel a little less alone on your journey. If this podcast has been meaningful to you, would you consider supporting the work of Love Boldly? Love Boldly's mission is to create spaces where LGBTQIA+ people can flourish in Christianity, and your donation helps make conversations like this one possible. You can give at www.loveboldly.net/donate. That's www.loveboldly.net/donate. Want to stay connected with the podcast? Follow us on Instagram at comingoutchristian_podcast for updates, resources, and community. Until next time, remember that you can be queer and Christian and queer.